Unfortunately, I cannot support an appropriations bill that itself does not support the American people.
What's up, Patriots? Welcome back to America First, the channel that puts our great nation first in everything we do. Before we dive into today's topic, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe with notifications on so you never miss our content defending American values and fiscal responsibility. Today, we're reacting to some congressional remarks about a transportation and housing appropriations bill. And folks, what we're hearing is the same old tired playbook from the big government crowd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Womack and Ranking Member Clyburn, for your hard work on this bill. I really wish that I had good things to say about this bill, but we have here yet another victim of the majority's slash and burn policy as they continue to hack away at the federal government and the essential services that it provides. Not only does this bill gut public transit funding, including bus infrastructure investments and transit infrastructure grants, which will lead to service cuts and the loss of thousands of jobs, the majority appears to be proud of the staffing cuts that this bill will direct. HUD staffing alone will be reduced by an astounding 26%. These cuts will all but ensure that the government will become less accessible and far less responsive to the needs of everyday Americans. With our infrastructure continuing to crumble and with housing costs at an all-time high, no thanks to the Trump administration's unpredictable trade policies, now is not the time to abandon our commitments and leave the public to fend for themselves. I don't think it's a particularly bold statement to say that everyday people rely on the safety, availability, and convenience of transportation and housing. That's why I'm confused by the majority's strategy of underfunding and establishing barriers to access. The federal government should not act as an obstacle to reliable transportation and reliable housing. But yet, that's what this bill does. It underfunds housing for low-income senior households and people with disabilities. It cuts lead paint remediation efforts. Who would be opposed to any of these things? The bill eliminates housing counseling assistance for HUD-certified housing counselors who provide assistance to working households to achieve the American dream of owning their own home. It also eliminates programs that spur the development of new affordable housing. Do we want to close the door for the hardworking families who want to take ownership and practice stewardship of a piece of their country? This bill also drastically underfunds our railroads. With a 91% cut to the Federal Railroad Administration, it decimates port infrastructure development and significantly reduces transportation infrastructure spending, which will lead to road congestion and deterioration. Unfortunately, I cannot support an appropriations bill that itself does not support the American people. I urge my colleagues across the aisle to join us at the table to craft a reasonable and responsible transportation, housing, and urban development bill instead of going it alone down this political, highly partisan path. Let's work together to address the real-life needs of the American people, wherever they are in our nation and whatever their demographic or geographic identity they happen to claim. Let's work together for the American people. And with that, I urge a no vote on this bill in its present form, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman.
Let me break this down for you, because the mainstream media won't give you the real story. First off, let's talk about what's really happening here. We have a representative complaining about spending cuts to federal programs, calling it a slash and burn policy. But here's what they're not telling you. For decades, we've been throwing taxpayer money at these programs with little to show for it. Our infrastructure is still crumbling despite billions in federal spending. Housing costs are still skyrocketing. So maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't lack of funding, but mismanagement and government overreach. The speaker mentioned a 26% cut to HUD staffing and acts like this is some kind of tragedy. But let's be honest about what HUD has accomplished. We've created a massive bureaucracy that's made housing more expensive, not less. These aren't essential workers we're talking about. These are bureaucrats pushing papers around Washington, while hardworking Americans can't afford to buy homes. Now they're crying about cuts to public transit funding. Here's the thing, patriots. Public transit in most American cities is a money pit. Billions of dollars go into these systems that are underutilized, poorly maintained, and often unsafe. Meanwhile, hardworking Americans who drive to work every day are forced to subsidize transportation they don't even use. If public transit was actually valuable, it would be profitable or at least break even. The fact that it needs constant government subsidies tells you everything you need to know. The representative also mentioned housing counseling programs being eliminated. Let me tell you something about personal responsibility. For generations, Americans figure out how to buy homes without government counselors holding their hands. We had strong families, community networks, and financial institutions that actually cared about their customers. The government getting involved in housing counseling is just another way to create dependency and expand the federal bureaucracy. They're also complaining about cuts to lead paint remediation. Now, nobody wants lead paint in homes, but this is a perfect example of federal overreach. Lead paint remediation should be handled at the state and local level, not by some federal bureaucrat in Washington who's never set foot in these communities. Local government and property owners are perfectly capable of addressing these issues without federal micromanagement. The speaker mentioned the Federal Railroad Administration facing a 91% cut. Good. Amtrak has been a taxpayer-funded disaster for decades. It loses money on almost every route, provides substandard service, and competes unfairly with private transportation companies. If passenger rail was viable in America, private companies would be doing it profitably. The fact that we need government subsidies to keep these trains running proves they're not meeting real market demand. Here's what really gets me about this whole speech. The representative talks about serving everyday Americans while advocating for programs that primarily benefit government contractors, union bosses, and bureaucrats. Real everyday Americans are the ones paying for all of this through their taxes. They're the ones who get up every morning, drive their own cars to work, pay their own mortgages, and take care of their own families without government assistance. The speaker also blamed housing costs on Trump's trade policies. This is typical deflection from the real causes of high housing costs, which are primarily government regulations, zoning restrictions, and environmental red tape that make it nearly impossible to build new housing. Cities run by Democrats for decades have some of the highest housing costs in the nation, and it's not because of trade policy. What we're seeing here is the classic big government response to every problem. Throw more money at it, create more bureaucracy, expand federal control. But after decades of this approach, we have worse infrastructure, higher housing costs, and more people dependent on government programs than ever before. The real solution is to get government out of the way and let the free market work. Reduce regulations that make housing expensive to build. Stop subsidizing failed transportation systems. End corporate welfare disguised as infrastructure spending. Put the money back in the pockets of hardworking taxpayers who know how to spend it better than any bureaucrat in Washington. This is about more than just budget numbers, patriots. This is about the fundamental question of whether America is going to remain a free market republic or become a socialist bureaucracy. Every dollar we spend on unnecessary government programs is a dollar taken away from families trying to build their own American dream. The representative ended by calling for bipartisan cooperation, but what they really want is for Republicans to roll over and agree to more wasteful spending. Real bipartisan cooperation would be Democrats joining Republicans in cutting wasteful programs and reducing the size and scope of federal government. We need to remember that government doesn't create wealth, it only redistributes it. Every government program has to be paid for by taking money away from productive Americans. The question isn't whether we want good roads, affordable housing, or safe transportation. The question is whether we want these things provided efficiently by the free market or inefficiently by government bureaucracy. That's why elections matter, patriots. That's why we need to support candidates who understand that America was built on individual liberty, personal responsibility, and limited government, not endless bureaucracy and government dependency. Thanks for watching America First. If you agree that it's time to put American taxpayers first instead of government bureaucrats, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content defending our constitutional values. And remember, the best way to make America great is to keep government small and let freedom ring. Until next time, stay strong, stay free, and always put America first.